Hi everyone, my name's Sarah and I wanted to share a bit of my testimony and story of how I came to know God. To give you a bit of background, most of you know me to be fairly quiet, pretty laid back, but there's also a side to me which in the past has been known to be very spontaneous, rebellious, reckless. Probably a lot of other words could be used to describe me then. Back then, all of which got me into trouble, and I've done a lot of things in the past, particularly my teenage years and early 20s, which I'm not at all proud of. I spent a lot of time out all night with friends, in bars, nightclubs, having what felt at the time was fun. I don't think mum and dad knew where I was half of the time, and I can't even imagine what they would have gone through. I definitely would not have wanted to parent me. Anyway, thankfully, God has done a lot of work over the years, and you don't see a lot of that now. Hopefully none. Anyway, I'm very thankful to have wonderful, kind, loving, encouraging, patient parents when I grew, throughout my life and as I've grown up. I grew up in a tiny village just outside Southport with my parents and younger brother. I wasn't brought up knowing God. I was brought up with a knowledge of Bible stories and who Jesus was through primary school and through some members of my family who knew God, Granny Nora in particular. It was really when I met Dave when my journey to knowing God began. I can't really pinpoint an exact moment when I started to believe in God, more a series of things that occurred slowly over time. After meeting Dave in about 1999, I met his mum, who was a Christian, and she was extremely passionate about her beliefs, some of which I listened to and a lot which I didn't. But she always said she was praying for us, and I'm very grateful for that. We moved just after we'd got together. I think it was only about 3 months after me and Dave got together, we moved in to our first flat together in Southport. Just a few months after that, we decided we would move. Neither of us had been to university or had really lived away from home, and we wanted to change from what we had always known. We pretty much stuck a pin in a map and came up with Manchester. I worked in the travel industry at the time, and a lot of the bigger companies were there, so that worked fine. I remember I went for an interview, and the employers were concerned why we were moving so far away and asked why. I just said that Dave had a job at the airport. He hadn't. He'd been for an interview, but he hadn't weeks earlier, but he hadn't heard back. Anyway, they seemed happy with that, and they phoned me later that day to say that I'd got the job. The next day, to our complete surprise, Dave received a letter saying he had the job at the airport, which we were quite shocked about. Also very glad, because there was no way we'd have managed moving, paying rent and bills on just my wage. So we moved to Hyde, just outside Manchester, and I think we ended up moving about 3 times in less than a year before finally buying our own house. We got married in a church in 2003. Dave was really keen to get married in church, but I wasn't really bothered, to be honest. It also meant that I would have to get baptised first, as the vicar wouldn't marry us until I was baptised, and I hadn't been baptised as a child. We found a church in Hyde where the vicar was surprisingly laid back and happy just to baptise me. It was a Church of England, and he was excited as he'd never baptised an adult before, only babies. Just after we got married, we had great news that I was pregnant, but unfortunately there were complications, and they told us it was an ectopic pregnancy and not viable. To be honest, I was shocked and didn't fully understand it at the time. I just remember going for blood tests and scans every 48 hours while they monitored what was happening. It was slightly unusual, as they couldn't see the embryo on any scans, but they could tell from blood tests that it was growing as hormone levels kept rising. I had tests for a couple of weeks, and they decided it would be too dangerous to leave things as they were, as I could have become seriously ill. So they decided they would have to start me on a course of chemotherapy injections to kill off any growing cells, which, to be honest, just seemed horrendous. That night, I remember praying for what I recall to be the first time. I can't remember what I said. I think I probably questioned why it was happening. I did know though that Barbara Dave's mum was praying. She prayed for us a lot at that time. The next day we went back to the hospital. They did another blood test, and for the first time in the 2 weeks the hormone levels dropped, which meant they didn't need to give me the chemotherapy. We were really, really relieved, very thankful, although still upset and distraught, really, that we'd lost a child. And unfortunately, after that, we went on to have 4 further miscarriages. We had tests, and we were told that they couldn't see a reason for what had been happening, but it was possible that I just couldn't carry a baby. They just didn't know, to be honest. A little while late, well, I think probably weeks after, I left my job in travel without having another job to go to, for a number of reasons, but mostly I think maybe I blame myself somehow, thinking that the miscarriages were my fault, and maybe down to all the travelling I was doing. Plus, after what we'd been through, I wanted to spend more time at home with Dave instead of travelling. After a few weeks, just a couple of weeks, I found a new job. This time 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, working for an IT company who wrote software for travel companies, which was absolutely perfect. We also decided to move again. I think there were too many memories at our house in Hyde, and we needed to focus on the future, even though we didn't know what exactly that was and what that held. I was working in Altrincham. We saw Northwich on the map and thought that looked as good a place as any. We quickly found a house in Weavering. It was big enough for a family, it had a garden so we could extend, and it seemed like a nice area. We didn't know anyone who lived here, but it was much nicer than where we were in Hyde, and a bit closer to our families in Southport, so that just worked. We moved into our house in Weavering. It needed a lot of work doing, so I think probably we took out a bit of frustration on the house over what had happened. We gutted it completely, took all the plaster, everything off the walls in every room. Right in the middle of doing that, we found out we were expecting another baby. This time everything went well, and we had the first of our 3 children, Emily. Just after we moved, I think we moved in the January, and it was in the April. I think I remember reading the Weavering News and reading that the local church, St Mary's, had new vicars who had also just moved from Hyde. They happened to be just a few miles down the road from where we were living at the time, and I remember thinking that was very bizarre. Just after having Emily that I'd met a friend through toddler group, Vicky, and she invited me to a Mums and Tots Bible study at St Mary's, and I found myself doing a start course that the vicar at the time, Jenny, ran. At the end of the course, she talked about inviting Jesus into our lives, so I just did. I didn't really understand it, but it just felt right. I didn't say anything at the time, as I didn't really know what to do next, or even fully understand why I said the prayer, to be honest. Anyway, I carried on going to Bible study groups and church, and I was just learning about God. I believed, but didn't really understand. But at the same time, everything that I was learning just seemed to make so much sense. A few years later, I came across the Stronghold. I visited the coffee shop a few times, but never thought about moving churches, as I was completely happy where we were and had a lot of amazing friends there. Then we were invited to a baptism at the Stronghold, and it was just very different to anything I'd been to before. Still had no intention of changing churches, but ended up doing an Alpha course at the Stronghold. And for a while, me and the kids went to both churches. I did feel like we were being pulled to the Stronghold. I and it was a hard decision to make, really. Especially as when Dave went to the baptism, he said he would never ever step foot in the stronghold again. Anyway, a few years later, we carried on. Me and the kids carried on going to the stronghold. Dave did go back. He got persuaded by way of being bought a ticket to a men's conference by Mike. He didn't want to be rude, so he just went. He actually encountered God there, and a little while later, in November 2015, we were both baptised. Soon after that, all of the three children, Emily, Max and Jack, individually made the decision to invite Jesus into their lives too. Since being baptised, I've seen God move in our lives in incredible ways. We've seen Dave's ears healed. He shared his testimony a few weeks ago. God took me out of what was diagnosed as postnatal depression and off medication. We have seen God's provision for the business and our finances in different ways. Just recently, against all odds, our son, Max, who's been diagnosed with autism and a bundle of other things, was given a place at a private specialist school, which we've been told is actually one of the best in the north of England, and it's all been fully funded. I'm very, very blessed to have a wonderful husband, 3 beautiful children, and our own home, as well as lots of friends and amazing people who I may never have met if I didn't know God. Those people really are more than friends. They've become family. Looking back at all the house moves and job changes, even my job choice in travel, I can see that I was always searching for something more. I just didn't know at the time it was God I was searching for. But I can also see God's hand on my life, on our family's life, in the years before we knew him. He led me to meet Dave. I believe God stepped in and stopped me having the chemotherapy. He got Dave the job at the airport so we could move, and then brought us to a place where we would both finally come to know him. As I was unknowingly searching for him, searching for God, he was working good in our lives and waiting for me to choose him. Really, for me, there was a clear difference between life without God and life with him. I lived for 31 years not knowing God, and I've lived for 11 years knowing him, and there is no comparison. Life still has its challenges and its difficult times, but God is there as much through the hard times as he is in the good times. Since knowing him, I've seen and experienced love, hope, peace, happiness in a way that is simply unexplainable and impossible to put into words. Like a lot of things, though, in this life, even though God was coming after me, it was a choice I had to make to know him, to follow him and accept his gift and promise of eternal life. If I had one regret, it would be, I don't really have regrets, because I think everything that's happened or that I've been through has taught me things. God certainly turned things around for good. If I did have one regret, it would be that I didn't ask Jesus into my life sooner. But if that were the case, I wouldn't know the difference between life with God and life without him. So for that, I am very grateful. Thank you for listening. Bye.